girls to the Countess and Kristoff Variety Channel. I'm the Countess and I'm here today to do winemaking basics part 2 with you. Thanks for joining me and let's get started. So last time we talked in winemaking basics part 1, I talked about all the equipment you need. Today is going to be all about the chemicals. There are so many different things that you need to use and it's very important we go over them all. First thing, most vital thing is your sanitizing solution. So this is a very easy to use sanitizing solution. It's called Easy Clean No Rinse Powdered Cleaner. And what I do is I'll take 1 tablespoon of this into 1 gallon of warm water and I'll use it to sanitize all the equipment we talked about in the last video. I also will sanitize any cutting boards, knives, or anything I'm going to use for food preparations. And at the end, I'll even sanitize my sink because I'll be rinsing and dropping things in the sink. So sanitization is not something to be skimped on. I sanitize every step of the way. It's very, very important because you don't want contamination in your wine. Otherwise, it can develop off flavors or off-putting flavors, or things that can actually make your wine turn to vinegar and go bad. So sanitizing is very, very crucial step in all of the winemaking processes. Do not skip it. I promise you, you will not have better wine for cutting corners in sanitization. Very important. All right, next thing that we need to talk about is acid blend. So acid blend is typically what gives its wine really good complexity of flavor. Acid blend is made of citric acid, malic acid, and tartaric acid. Typically, you will use 1 teaspoon of this per recipe of 1 gallon of wine. You can substitute this for the juice of 1 whole lemon if you want to, but I find that the acid blend is easier to use. I will again link all of the chemicals I'm using today down below in my Amazon link so that you guys can easily get it if you don't have a winemaking supply shop near you. Next, we need to talk about yeast nutrient. Yeast nutrient is what you put into the wine to give the yeast a longer chance of fermenting out properly. So this is diammonium phosphate, in case you can't find something labeled yeast nutrient. I typically will use 1 teaspoon of this per gallon of wine just to give the yeast some good chance at living longer and fermenting out. I have used this at other stages in the wine to wake up the yeast that's kind of fallen flat and I don't think it's fermented out right and needs to wake up. I'll add a little bit of extra sugar, a little bit of extra yeast nutrient just to get that started again so that I don't end up throwing out a batch. It's always good to try and boost your wine if it's falling flat with a little bit of yeast nutrient and see if you can bring it back to life. Next, I'm going to talk about grape tannin. So this is a very lightweight brown powder. A little bit of this goes a long way. This is actually made from the skins of grapes. You can substitute this item for a couple bags of black tea or a 4/4 cup raisins in your wine recipe if you can't find tannin. I will typically use 1/4 teaspoon of this per gallon recipe. Next, I have Campden tablets. So Campden tablets are potassium metabisulfite. So if you're one of those people that are sensitive to sulfites in wine, do not use these. You can make a wine without these. This is a completely optional ingredient. I just typically like to use it because it prevents bacteria growth in the wines and prevents it from going bad. I have a better chance of coming out with a completed wine product. I am not sensitive to sulfites and neither is Kristoff, so we are perfectly safe using this. Typically how you use this is I'll take 1 tablet and I'll crush it between my measuring spoons. So I'll put the pill in the bigger spoon and I'll take a smaller spoon and I'll press the pill in between and then it'll turn into a powder. It's very easy to crush. It's not hard at all. And then I'll add that to the wine. There are different stages that you add these all to the wine. This one is very important. It's very sensitive to heat, so you want to add this to the wine once your wine is completely cool. These are the first 4 ingredients that you actually add to your wine before adding the rest of the ingredients. So typically I will add these and then I'll stop, and then 12 hours later I will add pectic enzyme. So pectic enzyme is used in winemaking it helps release the juice from the fruit. It helps break down the fruit. It's really, really good for those really hard fruits that have a hard time breaking down, like apples. Apples need a little extra pectin. They're a really hard fruit. Stone fruits, you typically want to use more of these in too. I will typically use 1 teaspoon of this per 1 gallon of wine. And then that is typically all the ingredients chemical-wise that you add to the wine at that stage. Because then next you're going to be adding your yeast to the wine 24 hours after this. So after the pectic enzyme, you're going to let your must settle and develop for 2 days before you add your yeast. So we're going to talk about yeast next. There's a lot of different yeasts out there. You do not want to use bread yeast. Bread yeast and wine yeast are completely different animals. You will not get a good tasting wine if you use bread yeast, because bread yeast cannot typically handle the high amount of alcohol content that wine yeast can. Wine yeast are specifically made so you can make certain types of wine, which is what we're going to talk about right now. So Red Star is the first brand I'm going to talk about. Red Star yeast is typically labeled by the types of wine. So this is Premier Classic. This one is Côte de Blanc. This one is Premier Cuvée. Premier Rouge. And Premier Blanc. So basically, white wine, red wine, bubbling or sparkling wine, champagne, blush, and classic. Probably the most generic one you could use for any winemaking batch. So what's fun about yeast is you can actually get different results from using different types of yeast. So let's say you make an apple wine, and for the first time you make it, you decide to use Premier Classic, regular everyday wine. It'll come out one way. The next time you decide to make it, let's say you decide to go crazy and try red wine, it will be different. It will not be the same. Next brand of wine yeast I want to talk about is Lalvin. I only have 3 packs here, but they make several different varieties. Lalvin wine yeast are typically labeled by numbers and letters. So for example, this one is EC-1118, 71B, and K1-V1116. I know that doesn't tell you very much. I only started using the Lalvin wine yeast very recently in my winemaking journey. They are a little more advanced. So the EC-1118 actually says it's for sparkling wines. This is for a higher alcohol content. So if you want something with like 20% ABV, then you definitely want to use an EC-1118. The other ones really don't tell you, but each one will give you different results. There are books available that you can go to, look them up in, and see which one you'd like to play around with. But we're supposed to be having fun here, so don't get too bogged down in your yeast right now. You're just starting out. Stick with the Red Star for now. Play around and get used to what these guys are like before heading off to Lalvin land. But if Lalvin's all you can find, just take good notes and keep track of what you're doing so that you know what you've done when you go to recreate that recipe that came out in the meeting. You can also get cider wines. So cider wines I typically use with apple cider if I'm making like a hard cider. This will produce kind of almost like a mead-like taste to me. So I've only done one of these cider house wine ones before. I really did enjoy it. It was really nice. Christoph, I think, really enjoyed it too. But I haven't really experimented with this one too much. So this one's probably going to be more in my future. Probably as apple season gets more kicked into play. Right now it's just kind of starting out, but it's not ready yet. All right. So now that we've talked about all of these chemicals, it's time to talk about these two. So this one here is potassium sorbate. So potassium sorbate is your stabilizer. So right when your wine is finished fermenting and you're about to go into the bottle is when you want to add this. So I will typically add 1 teaspoon of this per the gallon of wine, and I will let this set for 12 hours before I bottle. This will help me to ensure that none of the yeast will reanimate after it's been bottled and cause cork explosions and breakage and spillage, which is not fun to clean up. Trust me, folks, you do not want that to happen. So typically this will get added right before I go to bottle so that it doesn't ferment again, and I decrease the chance of that happening. It still can happen, but this will make it less likely. And the last little ingredient I have here, this is called Sparklinoid. This is a clarifying agent. So let's say that you have wine and it's just refusing to become clear. This is what's going to help that wine clear. Sometimes when a wine is being really stubborn, I did have one a while back that just was not clearing, was not fermentating out. It was just cloudy the whole time. So what I did is I took a teaspoon of this and I added it to the wine. No, I'm sorry. I actually added a teaspoon of this to a quarter cup of boiling water because you have to dissolve this first. That's right. And then I allowed it to cool before adding it to the wine. And then I let it sit for a while to see if it would happen. It was amazing. So within 72 hours, the cloudiness in the wine all like settled and fell to the bottom. And it was a cranberry wine. So what I think happened was I think I did not add enough pectic enzyme to break down fruit. So I think that was what was crucial in allowing that wine to not clear. So Sparklinoid agent is definitely really handy to have. I don't use it very much though. Most of my wine clears pretty quickly, pretty easily. I've been very lucky, but it's still good to have in your winemaking arsenal, just so that you can, fix this problem if it ever occurs. There's a couple other problems that can happen in winemaking. Ropiness, which are like little white strings that form in the wine. I've never particularly seen that happen, but I have heard people talk about it. I don't particularly know how to clear those kind of things. Usually if I do get in trouble, I will go to the winemakers forum for answers. And that is a great resource that you guys can use in the event that you guys get stuck. But of course, you can always ask me questions down below in the comments as well. Other thing I do want to talk about that's optional, it's kind of off. So in the equipment video, I talked about an acid meter. I don't use one. Oddly enough, you can get acid strips at your local fish store. So these pH test strips will tell you the acidity of whatever solution you're measuring. So you just take the little strip. It's got one little square on it. You dip it into your solution, you let it cure. And then the chart on the side will tell you where your pH is, depending on what you need it to be. So this is another thing that you can optionally use instead of buying an acid meter to help you at least gauge where your acidity is in the wine before you start making it. Don't forget to follow along for the next part of Winemaking Basics Part 3. That's going to be where we make our first experiment wine batch. It's actually going to be 3 gallons of the same type of wine with different variations so that you can tell how to make wine the way you like it in the end, and you get a good gauge for how to make it. I believe that this is hands down the first wine that anybody should ever make. It's the first wine I ever made, and I learned so much from the experiment. I think it's really useful that you guys try it. Alright guys, thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below and I will answer them as they come. Make sure you like the video if you like what you saw today. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss any of the fun going on here in the lab. And as always, thank you for watching today, and I'll see you again here next time in the lab. Bye!